Rising sun, we love and cherish. Wanapụta n'ụzọ ree nwanne, wanapụta n'ụzọ ree nwanne. Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu ụmụ Biafra? Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu? Onye nwe anyị nye anyị amamihe, nye anyị amamihe zuru oke. Ka anyị merie ndị iro, ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha, zọgbuo ha, ona. Ka anyị merie ndị iro, ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha, zọgbuo ha, ona.
This is Biafra Radio. Welcome you to your promoter. We are here this evening. Biafra Radio, Uncle for Freedom. The Lawman. Mazi, Lawman.
Yeah, welcome to Echoes of Freedom, wonderful people of Biafra. On this hallowed platform, we explore the issues that shape our lives and our future. And as we all know, this is the month of May, Biafra History Month. A month that relates and, of course, crucial to the essence of every indigenous person of Biafra. Every person who comes from that very region, Biafra, is an indigenous person of Biafra. So here on this program, we will bring you a series of broadcasts in the act of reminiscing the sacrifices of Biafra heroes and heroines who paid the ultimate price that we may live, that we may still have the might, the fortitude to fight for this just cause. As we mark this period of remembrance, we are going to take a step back in history to understand the road that led to 1967. There is an adage, a popular Biafran adage that says, one who does not know where the rain began to beat them cannot know where it eventually dried off. We shall proceed. My name is Lawman Obichie. I pray you stay tuned to this program, and I beseech thee to invite your friends and foes, your kith and kins, especially of the younger generation, as we navigate together through the road that led to 1967. Very important, we needed to go back. We will be, going back, reversing the hands of the clock, going as far back as 1960, of course, not literally, but figuratively, so that many will have a glimpse of why we do what we do, and more so the essence of IPOB as a movement and Onyendumazi Nnamdi Kanu's agitation. So, Biafrans, stay tuned and invite your friends and invite your enemies as well. First off, we are going back to 1960, and to understand, we had no other option, because to understand the road to 1967, we must first understand how Nigeria was structured before 1966, 1967. When Nigeria gained independence, so to speak, I normally call it a flag independence. But then, so be it. Nigeria did operate a parliamentary system of government where executive power was held by a prime minister. We had Alhaji Sir Tafawa Balewa, and we also had Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was a ceremonial head of state and was converted to ceremonial president. Nigeria at that time had also a system, a regional system, and 3 regions were there. We had the northern region, we had the western region, and of course, the eastern region. Each region had a significant level of autonomy. They had their own government, they had their own leadership, and they have their own priorities as a people. If you watch the map of today's Nigeria, as they made us to believe, that the northern region was the largest in size. The western region, on the other hand, the left-hand side, was politically active and economically vibrant as well. The eastern region was known for its administrative development. The drive was there. Certain sectors, industrial sectors were booming. And of course, these three regions were thriving very well because on paper, the design of Nigeria before independence was that it could have had a sort of longevity. It could have remained the most thriving country in Africa till only God knows when. In the north, we had Ahmadu Bello, who was the premier. The northern region, as at that time, they were known for, farming. They were known for their granules. They were known for cottons. They were known for hide and skins and so on and so forth. On the west, we also had Obafemi Awolowo, who was the premier at that time. They were known for their cocoa. They were known for their rubber and timber and so on and so forth. They were doing so well, such that the proceeds from cocoa at that time were said to have funded a sort of education at that time, free education, reportedly in Africa. They were the first, or I should say, free education started from there as far back as 1955, even in Africa, I'm telling you. Now, when you go forth to the other side, the eastern region, eastern region was under the leadership of Michael Okpara, who was the premier as well. The eastern region were known for agriculture, massive one, I must say. They were known for farming as well, but they majored mainly in palm produce. They had palm oil, they had palm kernel exportation, did all their best to put Nigeria on the global stage as the world's largest exporter of, most of this palm produce as at that time. We also had coal in the Enugu region. We also had trade and commerce. As a pointer, we had the largest market in West Africa dating as far back as the 1950s. During that time, when Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was still the premier of Eastern region. But when Okpara took over as the premier, Eastern region even thrived faster than it were. Faster in industrialization, the Eastern region had a global economic recognition as the fastest growing regional economy in the world. All these things were pointers that on paper, the design of Nigeria was for good. Eastern region, where we now know as Biafra land, was thriving far ahead to the extent the rate of industrialization was very far ahead than what we had then in countries like South Korea, countries like Singapore, countries like Taiwan and Malaysia. To an extent, it was said that Malaysia got its first palm seedlings from Eastern region, from Biafra land during that time. You can imagine. But now, all those essence we have as a people has been destroyed by the now government, by Nigeria, of course. You can imagine when at that time we exported palm oil, palm kernels from remote areas in Aba, from remote areas in Owerri, the old Owerri. As at that time, it was all about, developing your region, the West on your own, the North on your own, and the East, you have to develop your region. And it was all about a sort of true physical federalism. That is why when I hear Nigeria as a Federal Republic of Nigeria, it is laughable because it is only so on paper or by word of mouth. But the true physical federalism was practiced during the time Nigeria had regional autonomy, during the time when it was, at the end of the day, every region, the East, the West, the North, would go for their business, and at the end of the day, every revenue would be shared. Only a small part would be taken to the central government. You could have as large as 50% then to develop more. And Michael, what I learned, utilized that very avenue. 50% of every revenue from the eastern region was pumped back to developing the East and industrialization, So only about 15% was taken to the central government, which only managed, defense and some other foreign policies. That was how weak the central government was at that time. It did behoove every region to salvage themselves with all, whatever resources they had. Now, let me shock you. Did you know that major developments we have now, even as at this time, that grace Biafra land today, were courtesy of our people's innovativeness at that time? Where we have places like Golden Guinea and Umeh here, where we have places like the modern ceramic industry. These places, these developments were built as far back in the early 60s, during the times where we had regional autonomy. I'm not forgetting places like Nkalago Cement, the Nigeria gas factory in Enugu, and we still have places, to talk about. We have in Port Harcourt, we have Trans-Amadi Industrial Layout, a large estate. So you could see it never started today. We also had the Michelin tire factory. We also had the aluminum factory there in Port Harcourt. It didn't start today. It didn't start today. So all these were efforts of our people. We are the innovativeness of our people. The ingenuity of our people was such that whatever we had, as Onyendu would always say, that your brain resources is greater than what you have in the oil well. These were times when oil dominance were still, at the back of the pew. I must not also forget places like Enugu, where we had the most prestigious school in Nigeria, the University of Nigeria Nsukka. It was fully established and funded by Dr. Michael Okpara. Even the Hotel Presidential you have in Enugu today, it was built in the 60s during the regional autonomy we had and we leveraged on to having all these developments, although most of them are moribund now. These were happenings in the early 60s, just after Nigeria got her independence. And over time in the new Nigeria, you cannot trust a black man, Concerns about power, who would rule us, who would lead us, began to surface. Concerns about who would control the central government began to surface, who would make key decisions and how resources were distributed, So instead of collaboration then, suspicion began to grow. There were sort of ethnic and electoral conflicts at that time. And remember, we are talking about a newly made union. It's just like where you have a couple who just wedded, they should be enjoying their honeymoon within that time, approximate time. But a newly made union, but already early 60s, there was an atmosphere of mistrust. There was an atmosphere that made it difficult to build unity, to build a united national identity, as you may call it, you know. So you can say Nigeria was created on paper to look beautiful, but it was not anybody's fault because after all, the initiator of Nigeria, Lord Lugard, had said at some point that the northern and the southern protectorates were like oil and water that can never mix up, you see. So these were pointers to that very testament made by Frederick Lugard. Biafrans, if you're just joining us, anybody joining us, this is Echoes of Freedom. Here we retrospect, we collect the past, we go forward to confront what is bearing us on the face, and all these are instrumental to shaping our futures. This is Biafra History Month, and we have one duty: to remember our fallen heroes, and heroines, of course, who laid down their lives that we may live. So we are on a mission on this program to point us as far back as the early 60s, so that we will navigate together through this road that leads to 1967, that we may be able to understand what we are doing and why we are here. Now, remember, we are still on the road to 1967, and as Nigeria moved deeper in the 1960s, those very pointers began to blossom, began to magnify. The political foundation, the cracks in there began to crack. And there was one event that pushed these foundations to the brink of collapse. That was the event that happened in 1965. The event in the Western region, just about post-independence, 5 years post-independence in 1965. By this time, political tension in the West, where Obafemi Awolowo was the premier at that time, the united Western region began to tear apart. And there was an election at that point. This election was to, kind of elect somebody that would stand and represent the region in the central government. There was a supposed report that this election was greeted by wildfire rigging and corruption. There was chaos, there was, violent protests. In fact, political violence erupted the region, and it became a sort of operation. There was an operation anyway, Operation Wet. This Operation Wet, as it was brutal. Operation Wet was a brutal campaign, a brutal protest that specifically targeted opponents. They would, I'm just trying to explain it. It was a sort of scenario where angry thugs would come up, splashing opponents and wetting them. I think that was where the very operation, the name came from, Operation Wet. The idea was opponents splashing and wetting people, perceived opponents, with petrol and setting them ablaze. Political thugs and angry citizens were responsible, and they took to the streets. Houses, properties were set ablaze. Opponents were attacked, and the once peaceful region in the West was thrown into chaos. Remember, this is just 5 years after independence. and regional crisis began as a seedling that was just planted, a moment ago. The offshoot began and was created by a crisis in the West. Now, you could see all this. We are pointing towards what Frederick Lugard, what testament he made then, that oil and water, which in essence was the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate, could never mix, So this very violence in the West exposed the fragility of Nigeria, that Nigeria, even though it was enjoying a young democracy, cannot, grow to a very extent that will be said that a union, was ripened, they gave birth or they were delivered of children, and they could see their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These are characteristics of a fruitful union. But a young marriage, a young union as Nigeria, just after 5 years, met their low, So many events transpired in 1967, more in the Western region, and it triggered a growing fear amongst other regions in the North and also in the East, So by mid-60s, 1965, this tensions all around had created a deep, mistrust, unstable environment. It was within this atmosphere of mistrust and rivalry that questions began to come up, concerns began to come up. And, there was no other option than what 1966 gave us in the January, on the 4th and 5th of January 1966. There was no other option than the coup. The coup plotters, as early as January 4th, 5th, began, and it did come to limelight in January 15th, 1966. So we are going down this road all the way from 1960, all the way through 1961, 62, 63, and here we are, 1966. So revolution, a sort of revolution that was perceived, this revolution did backfire somehow. But how did it backfire? It was the conception of young officers then in the early hours of January 15, 1966. We had the likes of one Yoruba man, Major Adewale Ademoyega. I don't know if I'm getting that name correct. But this man, a junior officer in the army, had a very good plan that he thought would be instrumental to changing the then government, the then corrupt government. And he brought up this plan to his colleagues, Now remember, this very coup I'm talking about, we all know and many perceive it as, the infamous Igbo coup that happened at that time. But I'll try to shed light and expatiate the reason why it was maybe perceived as an Igbo coup, but rightfully was not. Major Adewale brought up the plan. He was the chief plotter of this very coup, or the coup at that time. And, as a junior officer, all your colleagues, your friends and cronies will just be among your rank, So when he brought up this plot, he took the file on paper to his colleagues, and his colleagues then at that point had to receive the paper You had the likes of Major Kaduna Nzogu. You had the likes of Major Emmanuel Ifajuna. You had the likes of one major as well, Major Chris Anuforo. So these plots on paper, they rallied round and made sure that in their bid to re-establish what they enjoyed, they wouldn't have minded to exterminate, to extinguish whomsoever that stood on their way as a leader or corrupt leader, so to speak. That is why I respect Major Adewale, because in one of his books, Why We Struck, if you can, grab that very book, he did throw or shed light on what happened, the reasons why these young officers took it upon themselves to ensure they brought sanity back in this newly wedded Nigeria. So going forward, we had Major Adewale who brought up this plan, and they took it up from there. The 5 major plotters were very strict that nobody, not even the senior officers, could know what was happening. The plan was presented by Major Adewale, and then Kaduna Nzogu was bequeathed a sort of leadership role as he led the coup to the northern region. And I think alongside one of the majors as well, Major Onwatuegu, helped out in exterminating and taking care of northern leaders, northern corrupt leaders. Kaduna Nzogu and Major Atuegu were instrumental to taking care of major corrupt leaders in the north. Whereas Ifajuna and Anuforo was also bequeathed with the task of taking care of corrupt leaders in Lagos. We all know what happened during the coup, and maybe why it was named an Igbo coup. In a bid to return, to make sanity return to the then Nigeria, top leaders like Ahmadu Bello, top leaders like Tafawa Balewa, who was the prime minister at that time, were killed. So the coup more or less succeeded in killing leaders who were perceived corrupt at that time. But you know what? These major coup plotters were not interested in power. Maybe because they were still junior officers. Well, they felt their task had been completed. And at that time, Major General Agui Ironsi had to take up the mantle to lead in Nigeria. He tried to stabilize the country by introducing a sort of unitary system of government that welcomed the military rule at that time. So we had reactions. Some people rejoiced. Some people went back to their bases. Some people saw it as a sort of ethnic plot and not a revolution. And a couple of questions began to rise. Why the leaders of the East were spared and all that. They forgot to notice that major leaders in the central government, even as we have today, were of the North. They had this very dirty mindset or motive from January until June, when they came back and initiated a sort of counter coup. By July 19th, or July 29, I should say, 1966, on the other side in the north, we had northern officers led by the likes of T.Y. Danjuma. We had Murtala Muhammad. We had a handful of northern officers who launched a counter coup, and they perceived that it was this was the the only way to revenge what happened in the earlier part of the year in January. During that time, what happened? The counter coup saw the killing of Major General Lagui Ironsi, who I learned was somewhere in Ibadan. He was traced there and killed. I learned he was dragged to a forest and executed. You know, so it was very terrible, such that the counter coup was not just a sort of change of government. It was a breakdown in the military government, a breakdown in the said central government that was instituted at that time. And for them, they thought it worthwhile to install a northerner, or I should say somebody from the middle belt. That was how Gowon came to power. So while all these were happening, Biafrans, our people residents in the north, our people resident as far back at the tip of Nigeria's map were executed. They were executed in Kano. They were executed in Jos, in Plateau Jos. This road to 1967 became a sort of highway of grief and agony. Pogroms here and there, thousands of Easterners, thousands of Igbo people were killed in cities mentioned. The cities I just mentioned in the Kanu, in Jos, all these places were heated with the extermination and decimation of our people. One of these tragic events that happened in Kanu that was recorded, we had over 100 Igbo people who were killed while they were waiting for a train in Kanu railway station. These people who had nothing. I tell people there is one thing about Nigeria. Nigeria is bound by several ethnic and religious differences, and it didn't start today, you can say. So most of these people exterminated, most of these people killed, were just because they were of Igbo descent, just because they were Easterners. So while these were happening, never forget, just 1945 and 1953 was also not excluded in what our people passed through in the north. These were recordings of the pogroms, recording of long-term extermination when it started. So you can see our people need to understand that when we talk about Biafra, when we talk about remembering our people who died during the fight, who died during the war times, many people call it Nigeria Civil War, but there was nothing civil about it. But in a jiffy, we would know what transpired on this road to 1967. So during these times, 1960 until 66, where growing tensions began. In 1966, the wave that brought us to where we are, or that ushered us to 1967, was very mighty. The 1966 wave was the straw that broke the camel's back, you know. And the onslaught was reported to have taken lives of about 40,000 people of the East. 40,000 people, Igbo people, who did nothing, who believed in the workability of Nigeria, you know, who took it upon themselves to establish, treasures in the north. These people were killed, these people were exterminated, and the surviving ones had no other option than to pack up themselves and head home. And over 1 million people, over 1 million Easterners at that time fled Nigeria. They had no option. Most of them left immovable treasures. Most of them left immovable fortunes and fled from Nigeria in the north, northern Nigeria, going down the east. So you could say our people need to understand that this very road to 1967, just a few miles away to 1967, we were greeted by grief, we were greeted by agony. And by the end of 1966, that trust between the regions that had once thrived independently, the trust was gone. The population was displaced, and the stage was set for 1967 declaration. So these are testaments, remember, of what the initiator of Nigeria, the creator, so to speak, of Nigeria, Frederick Lugard, said, that oil and water could never mix. So if you are just joining us, this is Echoes of Freedom on radio. On our radio, I beseech thee to share the program on Facebook, Echoes of Freedom on Biafra Radio. What we are doing today, because this is going to be a series of broadcasts, Biafra History Month, of course. But today we are shedding light on the road to 1967. We had to travel back to early 1960s for a better understanding of what happened and why we behold and take 1967 very close to our heart. So this program, I beseech thee to share this program. I beseech thee we are on our Biafra Radio app. Kindly log on to our Biafra Radio app and share. So we will go down memory lane to bringing back the collections of our sufferings, to bringing back the sacrifices of our people, to bringing back, to recollecting, to reminiscing what our people hold there, because we were pushed to the wall and we had no other option than to rebound. So we will be going on a short break. So when we come back, we will be able to understand how grievous it was for our people along the road a few miles away to 1967. So just stay tuned, our listeners, as we go on a short break and we will be back.
Gini kan genyunu Umu Biafra. Gini kam genyunu onye wanyi nyanya mamiye zuroke. Kanyi merie ndiro dina magi chuku jide ha zobo ha ona. Kanyi merie ndiro dina magi chuku jide ha zobo ha ona. Biafra. Beka unu neje Biafra ya marapu Biafra gane bozo gabiri Biafra gadindu. Take my boots off when I die, oh Biafra. Take my clothing to the camp. Any lawyer give my gun to someone else to fight for fatherland. Biafra, take my boots off when I die. Ojuku beze na la Biafra, edere ya na buri. Awolo wo wane ya Yakubu go one. Ewe ikimeri Biafra, Biafra win the war. Amodu Kasheling machine, heavy artillery, bomb and fighter. Enye mugo wa wanting to get my boy we nonu. Enye mugo wa wanting to get. Enye mugo wa wanting to get my boy we nonu. Enye mugo wa wanting to get. Umu Biafra, unekwe kwa nakago wa chuno. Unekwe kwa nakago wa chuno. Ochichi gesi na Ojukwu bịa onyeze aya chọrọ chichi gọwa ruo mgbe ebighị ebi. Ochichi gesi na Ojukwu bịa onyeze aya chọrọ chichi gọwa ruo mgbe ebighị ebi. Abụ m onye amamihe, abụ m onye amamihe, nne m anyị rapụkwa m ma bara onwe mami. Onye nwụrụ anwụ were akwụcha kechie ya anya wee Omeninyo bakweri yeri, Omeninyo bakweri yeri. Biafra kunye buso Nigeria. Makagini nina bundina magi Chineke, nina magi Chineke kereha, kereha, kereha. Commando ebute butere ya commando, ebute butere ya commando, commando ebute butere ya commando. Akụwigbo beri manoruo Chineke ntị, ọ dị megbo Chukwu chibai. Akụwigbo beri manoruo Chineke na nwanne njela agha, nwanna puta n'ụzọ re nwanne, nwanna puta n'ụzọ re nwanne. Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu ụmụ Biafra? Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu? Onye nwanyị nyanya amamihe, nyanya amamihe zuru oke. Ka anyị merie ndị iro ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha zọgbuo ha ona. Ka anyị merie ndị iro ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha zọgbuo ha ona. Ae mụ na nwanne njere agha abirego ifeajụ na rere anyị. Ae mụ na nwanne njere agha nwanna pụta n'ụzọ re nwanne, nwanna pụta n'ụzọ re nwanne. Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu ụmụ Biafra? Gịnị ka m ga-enye unu? Onye nwanyị nyanya amamihe, nyanya amamihe zuru oke. Ka anyị merie ndị iro ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha zọgbuo ha ona. Ka anyị merie ndị iro ndị na-amaghị Chukwu, jide ha zọgbuo ha ona. Ụmụokoribe m jikerebenu na ya emehie, ụmụokoribe m jikerebenu na ya emehie. Ebee ka unu si Biafra? Bee ka unu na-eje Biafra ya marapụ Biafra ga n'ebe ọzọ gabiri, Biafra ga-adị ndụ. Take my boots off when I die, oh Biafra. Take my clothing to the camp. Any lawyer give my gun to someone else to fight for fatherland. Biafra, take my boots off when I die. Ojukwu beze na la Biafra, edere ya na buri.
Yeah, welcome back. Welcome back, great Biafrans. Welcome back, lovers of freedom, good conscience, good people of good conscience. I say welcome back once again. You are still tuned to Echoes of Freedom as we trace the road to 1967. Remember, we had talked about the coup and counter coup, and we had no other option than to seek ways to address the growing fears, the cracks that were happening in Nigeria and, of course, affected our people. The Aburi Accord was brought to book, and the Aburi Accord is perhaps the most significant what if in Nigerian history. The road to Aburi was that very road still navigating or still leading to 1967. At first, it was thought that road to Aburi could be a savior or a last-minute savior that could salvage what disgrace, what pains and agony Nigeria, the new Nigeria, had been plunged into. And if the coups of 1966 were the fire, the Aburi Accord was said to have been an attempt or an extinguisher to take off this very fire that had been burning in Nigeria. Going down to 1966, 1967, in the early hours of the year 1967, January number 4, Nigeria's leader in the West, what is his name? The premier in the West, Sir Awolowo, was getting ready. And in the North, we had leaders from the northern part. Gowon was there. And the East, we had somebody representing the military, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwemeka Ojukwu. They couldn't meet in Nigeria because Ojukwu in the East, the governor of the East, feared for his life in Lagos or in the North. So they met somewhere in Ghana. They met somewhere, a sort of, neutral ground to see if they could iron out the very years of disarray in the newfound union. But what's really happened would seem to you as a shock because they agreed on a couple of things, but was reneged at some point. And we then took it as betrayal, as a form of betrayal. So leaders that headed the northern part, we had Yakubu Gowon, we had Usman Katsina, and in the east, we had Colonel Ojukwu, lieutenant. Then he hadn't rose up to the rank of the general, but we'd had him as the then governor in the eastern region. Now going towards the west, the representative of the west was Lieutenant Colonel David Ejor. We also had Colonel Adebayo in the west. These people found their way from Nigeria to a neutral platform, they thought, in faraway Ghana, to be able to have an understanding and maybe provide a solution to what had been happening and affecting them as a people, respectively. Gowon on the federal side arrived, and maybe they were thinking it was a brothers' meeting, a chance to talk as officers. They had to patch things up. They wanted a unified Nigeria and maybe a central command, a strong central command to keep the country together. But on our own part, we had Ojukwu. Ojukwu arrived highly prepared. He brought a team of legal and political advisors. We came along with documents. We came along with papers. And he knew that after the massacres of our people in the north, unity was a scary word for our people, for his people. So he was prepared and wasn't there for chats. He was there to redesign Nigeria. He was there to ensure that whatever was agreed would be put on paper and made a document. So what were his plans? He had plans to make Nigeria a confederal nation, or in other words, to run a confederal system of government where regions would pull apart, where regions would kind of be on their own and, kind of govern themselves, a replica of what they had earlier before that time. But what was actually agreed in the cool air of Aburi Hills in Ghana were never met. A few things were agreed upon, understandably. They had to renounce forces, kind of, coming to a pair that going forward, they would never had the opportunity to use force, to make reconciliations. They had to talk about the Supreme Military Council. They agreed that head of states would be, known as the commander-in-chief, just as we have today in Nigeria, that the head of state would be called the commander-in-chief. Major decisions would be made by the commander-in-chief, but not a unilateral one, of course. So they made a lot of decisions that were put on paper, and one of which Ojukwu made sure that the displaced persons, especially our people that were displaced, courtesy of the pogrom, courtesy of the annihilation, courtesy of the decimation, our people who had immovable treasures. You know how our people do. Wherever we go, we make sure we establish a kind of treasure, a kind of development. But all these things, we had to leave them apart and run for our dear lives. So one of the agreements that was signed on paper was to ensure that the federal government would continue to pay salaries of refugees who had fled their jobs in these regions, chief of which was the plan or the agreement to make sure confederation was introduced to Nigeria. Everybody left smiling. You could see the picture on the screen. Everybody left smiling. They shook hands, of course. They had lunch. They had teas together, or cups of tea together. They left Aburi smiling and shaking hands. But guess what? The moment they landed back in Nigeria, the Aburi spirit evaporated. Gowon, who represented the North, was highly convinced. They told Gowon, look, it seems you had given too many candies. It seems you had given too many away, too many proposals that would favor these people, that would make them thrive better than us, perhaps. This was akin to those times in the ancient Egypt when the children of Israel were held bound. And at some point, Pharaoh asked them to go, but don't go far. So this was akin to the situation we faced at that time, because a moment of betrayal had just appeared. Every agreement, every pact we had, we came back from Aburi, represented by our governor, Colonel Ojukwu, was put in the bin. So in Lagos especially, we had the federal permanent secretaries and legal experts. When they diagnosed and looked at this Aburi agreement, they were horrified. The court governor said, look, it seems you had given too many things away. They argued that if these regions finally took control over their armies, over their head of state, because a confederation is more or less countries in a country. You're going to be controlled by your own head of state, by your own police, by your own army. But they saw this as, giving too much, giving away too much, you know. So immediately, Gowon mounted the radio and issued a decree, which he termed Decree Number 8. So it's very pertinent, it's very important for our people to see that few miles to 1967, this same betrayal Ojukwu saw that made him to, go there alongside legal practitioners, go there alongside his documents. He brought out these documents, and that was where the famous chant, the mantra, "On Aburi we stand." On Aburi we stand, you could see it on the screen, where we had the documents by Ojukwu. He refused to accept any version of the agreement that gave central power over our security then, the Eastern people. So he vehemently vociferated, "On Aburi we stand." So it is very important, once again, that 1967, the war times, Nigeria-Biafra war in 1967, didn't just come up as, a volatile reaction. There was a buildup since 1960s, since mid-60s, which by all means, we tried to make it work. We tried as a people. We tried, and Aburi was, seemingly the last bridge. But when it collapsed, there was nothing left between Nigeria and the darkness of war. So at the end of 1966, which ushered us into 1967, January, by May 1967, the talking stage stopped. And we had no other option than to proclaim the sovereignty of our people. We had no other option to carve out a nation or a homestead for our people, a place we could call our homes, respectively. So, Biafrans and listeners all over, this is just a glimpse of what pertains us, what relates us as a people. This is just a glimpse of the reasons why we hold there onto Biafra History Month on the 30th of May every year. It's a very special day. We stand to remember the sacrifices of these people who met their end while they were defending the sovereignty of our own land, while they were defending our essence as a people. So we are inching closer to ending this program. But before then, we just have to wrap up and also let our people know that when 1967, in the early hours of May 30th, came by, pressured by our people onto Ojukwu, he had no other option than to stand before the world and declare the sovereignty of Biafra. So you could see it wasn't just a sudden decision. It was born out of a desperate need, or I should say desperate needs pertaining to security of our people. We were very well, how do I put it? We were endangered species, The security of our people, you could imagine during the 1966 pogrom, thousands were killed. When I mean thousands, I mean tens of thousands were killed. So this was one of the reasons why the people had to pressure Ojukwu to declare a home for our people. So after the massacre of thousands of Easterners, we finally could have a place we called home. So it is very important that we capture these events so that by the next time we come here, it would be easy for us to connect the dots. It would be easy for us to put up the banner of our people, of our heroes, of our heroines who thought it worthwhile to go out there to take bullets, to defend the land, and to ensure our people are not duly exterminated. Of course, when the sovereignty of Biafra was declared, our people were very happy. The Igbo people and, of course, Easterners at large were very happy. They took to the streets, exhibited their joyous moment. They took to the streets, they celebrated, believing that finally that a place, a homeland was come. But what really happened after that moment? In faraway Lagos in the west, where we had a federal government headed by Yakubu declared a swift response. He declared a move that, oh, look, these people have gone the rebellious way, and he immediately launched an attack on our people. So this is just a summary of what happened to our people all these years from 1960, a newly found country, a newly wedded couple, so to speak, that never enjoyed, and we as a people, we never enjoyed this union. So these number of years, very, very short for a sort of disagreement, a sort of chaos, but we had no other option than to defend ourselves. So Biafrans and listeners all over the world, friends of Biafra and lovers of freedom, this is just, a glimpse of what happened on the road to 1967. Of course, lines were drawn, flags were raised, but we were greeted by bullets, strange bullets, in the early hours of July 1967. Think on the 6th of July 1967. So questions we have, or you may have over there, what really transpired after these first shots? What really happened? How did the police action that turned around, to safeguard our people in the name of looking for a neutral ground to solve our problems? How did they come around, to turn a Cold War, a 30-month Cold War that claimed their citizenries? This question is if it were to be a civil war, because many people out there do call it Nigeria Civil War, but we don't take it as one. It was a full-blown war, Nigeria Biafra War. So in our next episode, we'll be shedding lights on why we call this a full-blown war and not a civil war. So we urge you to stay tuned for our next broadcast, where we are going to dive deep into the heart of 1967 and the start of this very conflict. So you are still onto radio of the people. You are still onto the Echoes of Freedom. That's the program we have here, and it is hoisted on Biafra Radio. We would have no other option than to wind down. As we draw the curtain on today's program, we must thank you eminent Biafrans, for listening. We must thank you for sharing the program. We must also thank you for staying put towards this time, because I believe we have gone past 80 minutes in this program. So until next time, I urge you to stay strong. I urge you to ensure your voice echoes where it matters most. I urge you to not discard what you have as an essence, what you have as a treasure. That very thing is what we hold there, and that very thing is the reason why we do what we do as a movement. And that very thing is the reason why we hold there to our hearts 30th of May every year. So from here, I greet everybody and ensure you stay put when next we are gonna come online. So from here, it is goodbye. Thank you.
Nwanne ya Yakubu go one. Ewe ikimeri Biafra win the war. Amodu Kasheli machine heavy artillery bomber.